fishing industry in Europe, just about, and it was given away by Ted Heath. As a afterthought, he just said, oh, we'll give it away to the Europeans for them to select it. And we haven't even got the 12-mile limit.
Look, I'll tell you, I was an fisheries minister, right? I implemented regulations in the 6-mile zone where we got exclusive competence to protect the inshore fleet. I did that. I did it via secondary legislation here in Wales. That's what we were able to do. We were able to go to legislate up to the 12-mile zone with a collaboration and cooperation of the Commission. We've done that as well. We're able to do that. We've never had a 200-mile fishing zone in Wales. We haven't sea waters around us. When you look at what Norway are able to do, they have to obey EU rules in union waters. Fish do not understand the borders of different countries. I have to tell you that the haddock in the place that are caught in the Irish Sea swim up from the Bay of Biscay. Now, if we are not a part of determining who and what fishing quotas take place in those areas, we won't have fish left to fish here. And if you look at one of the great successes in fishing, I know the fisheries policy, there's bad press everywhere. And, certainly when you're in Fisheries Council, you've always got protesters outside. But let me tell you this, things like the cod recovery plan have actually saved cod stocks in the North Sea. And now there's an issue about how much cod is actually there eating other species. We've got issues there to manage. If you look at how we come to use the third world countries, third-party countries to enable us to open union waters to other nations to fish as well. We're doing that in a regulated way, which means that we have sustainable stocks now and into the future. If we carried on the way we were, the fishing industry would be dead. Our seas would be empty. We were facing a crisis, an absolute crisis.
Yes, because the Spanish fleets were allowed to fish all through the British waters, through the whole of the North Sea, and they were sucking it. Danish fleets were actually scouring the bottom of the sea, and everything was going for fertiliser.
Let me tell you, there are still Spanish boats sailing out of them for today. And we manage them, and we regulate them, and we do that to protect our stocks and to protect our fisheries. And I'll tell you one thing else, it works.
So the cod recovery plan makes system sustainable now and in the future, and saved cod stocks, Alun Davies says.
It's quite an incredible thing that we are a marine country. We're surrounded by seas. Yet, we import over £2 billion worth of fish a year. Why? I remember when I was born and brought up in Ayr, a fishing port. I remember as a young lad used to come in and see all the fishing boats, saw the fish market disappear. You go to Ayr now, a couple of pleasure boats, and that's it. But the whole thing is that if you look at the fish which we gave away to Europe, we gave it away to them. Europe's have about 60% of all their fish comes from this water. And what I'd like Alun to actually explain to us tonight is when Greenland left in 1984, how come they are so strong in the fishing? They've made so much money. The whole fishing fleet is regenerated, and it's made them quite wealthy. And they are the only country ever to leave the EU, and that's on fish. And I want to see us going back to a situation that if somebody wants to fish here, they pay us for a license for it. And then we decide who comes, how much to pay. And we want to then start forgetting about the £2 billion a year that we are bringing in. Let's start using our own fish and getting employment back into that area, which has been devastating.
Well, that's largely what happens. Every fishing port operating in Welsh waters has a licence from the Welsh Government. I issued licences, I created the system as a fisheries minister. That's largely what happens. If there are 200 vessels licensed in Welsh waters, and they fish, they can fish anywhere in the European Union, but they are in European Union waters.
What nationality are those fishermen? Spanish?
Some of them are Spanish.
Most of them are Spanish or French.
Well, I don't think many of them are Spanish in the speak Flip, so they all speak Welsh anyway. So they're Welsh-speaking Spanish as well as the
Patagonian.
But
it depends through the chain.
But let me tell you, I understand what people say about fisheries policy. I spent many hours of my life trying to reform it. I understand the criticisms being made of it. But fundamentally, what has it done? It has regulated fishing in a number of different sea areas, which is meant to be able to protect stocks. So we don't have the crashing of fish stocks in the North Sea and in the North Atlantic that we did have some time ago. We have protected fishing stocks. We have then ensured that fishing quotas mean that we are fishing what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. By changing regulations on discards 2 years ago, we're actually making sure that we now land all the fish that we are catching. Big, progressive decisions that are changing the way we fish. By regulating the sorts of tackle and nets and gear used by the fishing industry, we are enabling younger fish to live in the seas and to grow to a weight or size that they can be caught. Fundamental decisions that have made our stocks sustainable. And that is all a good thing. What we need to be able to do is to ensure that this is a real question.
Can I bring you back?
I just finish my point with us. Because we simply don't eat the fish that's caught around our shores. If you look at the shellfish fishery in North Wales around Menai Straits, all of that goes straight to Amsterdam and Brussels. Right? That's where it's eaten, because we don't eat them here. So if we export,
What's kind of the situation in Greenland? They left the EU in their situation.
As a population size of Neath, and eats fish. You know, they don't have the big fish industry that you have in either Scotland or parts of Spain. They simply don't. They don't have the ports, and they don't have the numbers of people. But, you know, it is a small inshore fishery that has been able to make Greenland sustainable. I think Greenland is a great example of sustainability hardwired into policy. And I think we've got a lot of things to learn from Greenland in terms of sustainability. I'm glad the European Union is learning those lessons and making all of our industries more sustainable.
Okay, Blair. Small inshore fishery population size.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's one thing I'd like to agree with Alun here tonight, and I'm sure there's maybe other things that we can agree if we had a pint together later. But the whole thing is, one, is that the government in this country just now is a total disaster for us, and I agree with them totally on that. The other thing is that if we're living in Wales we want to be healthy. Why do we not eat more fish? Why do we not catch it? And instead of having the National Health Service just now, which is costing us 10% for diabetes, a lot of it diabetes too, whereas people are overweight and obese, let's catch some more fish, let's encourage them to eat it. And by the way, let's encourage them to eat more Welsh lamb. And let's encourage the country to use more British steel rather than Chinese and European dump steel. So yes, let's get together as a democracy and start using the things that we actually have within this country.
I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. And the Welsh Government is launching a new £5 million package to promote Welsh land, and they're doing that later this year.
Okay, let's hear from the floor.
And it's funded by the Commission.
Thank you, Alan.
Yes,
You mean
my name's John Gilbert, I'm from Wrexham. Every year, the European accounts are audited, and the auditors never have yet signed them off because there's so many black holes in there, money goes missing. Now, I've worked in the private sector all my life, and if my company's accounts weren't audited, someone got the sack, or the company would go out of business. So I'd just like to ask, why are there never any consequences, and why does no one, even their government, care that these accounts are not signed off?
Okay, Blair, any black holes in the budget?
I think that's a wonderful point. I think 2 years ago, the latest one, I think they got to 56% and then decided they couldn't sign off their accounts again because of fraud and because of corruption within the EU. So I think you're absolutely right. What I'd like to say to you, as maybe not politicians, but lay people, you've got some savings in the bank, and you want to invest them in a company, and you want to make sure that that company is going to give you a dividend. And you don't go along there and you say, I want to invest some money in your company. By the way, when did you last have your account signed off? And they say 21 years ago. 21 years they haven't been signed up. So why then are we putting all this money in to an institution run by bureaucrats? And by the way, the staff for the EU only pay 12% tax. 12%. We're all paying 20 to 40, they pay 12. Why would you then go to a company and invest your money? You would say no. So what we say to the EU is, I'll tell you guys, we'll come back once you've signed off your accounts and we know that you're stable. That's the way to go forward.
Okay, Alun, the EU hasn't signed off its budget in 21 years. What have you been saying about that?
That's not true. Last time there was a problem of that sort of EU budget was 2007. The EU budget signed off every year. What you're talking about is issues of potential fraud. And what you've got, it's a simple misreading of a sometimes technical and otherwise non-technical issue. If you look at, for example, the Common Agricultural Policy, where does that go to? How is that money spent? Well, it's not spent by the Welsh Government, as the agency here in Wales, or by the EU Commission in Brussels. It's actually spent by individual farmers. And so an auditor based in Brussels, looking at the accounts, cannot sign off the accounts of a farmer in Llandipsen. Simple as that. So there's a technical issue about that in auditing law, which is different to actually signing off the EU accounts. There's no issue with the EU accounts being signed off by the Court of Auditors. They make significant rulings time and time again. And so there are consequences. Let me tell you here, I introduced law in Wales, which I was somewhat concerned about, because of the threat of what we call disallowances. So that if you are found in court not to have implemented a law in a correct way, then you are fined. It's called a disallowance. And the UK government, the English government, with this matter in agricultural law, has a budget to pay disallowances every year because they prefer to pay fines and do things properly across there. That's what you get with a Tory government. But if you look in Wales, we haven't got a disallowance, I don't think. We haven't certainly in this assembly in the last 5 years. I don't think we've had one in the previous one either, so we haven't had one certainly in the last 9 years. And because we deliver law properly here in Wales. But there are consequences to not obeying the law, and there are consequences. I have signed off orders fining individual farmers and taking 5% or 10% of their single payment off them as a fine, consequence to them breaking rules. So there are consequences. But I have to say to you, quite often the strike rate for that is actually very, very low.
Could I just come back, please? Just to say, what you're saying then is every year we see through the media, whether it's the television, political programmes or the newspapers, yet again the European accounts have failed, the auditors, but you're saying that's untrue.
Yes, I'm not saying that you see it on television actually.
Well, I've seen it on the daily politics, which I watch every day.
You might hear a politician say that. I'm not sure I've heard a journalist say that. But let me say this. What you read in the newspapers isn't necessarily the truth.
I know that. I'm not stupid, but it seems right across the board. There's a general consensus that the accounts don't get signed off. It's the first time I've heard a politician tell me it's all okay.
I don't know where we obviously find a consensus in different places.
All right. Thank you.
I don't know that.
Can I?
It's an interesting one because what's happened is that Alun has mentioned the Common Agricultural Policy, which he's involved in. And the Common Agricultural Policy, if you look at even the figures in 2013, France gets 17.5% and we get 6.8%. What I would like to see with the Common Agricultural Policy is not decided in Brussels, because what they do is 80% of it goes to wealthy landowners. I live up in North Wales, near Chester. The Duke of Westminster is there. Last year, he received nearly £400,000, the Duke of Westminster, in Common Agricultural Policy. And you either have wealthy landowners, or what you have is very large industrial agricultural industries which are getting the money. And the small farmers are not getting it. What I would like to see, if we come out of the EU political situation and get our money back into this country, is make sure that that money for the Common Agricultural Policy in Wales goes through the Senate. And the Senate then decide how to distribute that between the farmers in Wales, because they are closer to the situation than where they are in Brussels. And have a look at another situation here. Why do we have 3 weeks in Brussels and 1 week in Strasbourg? It costs £100 million to move everything from Brussels to Strasbourg because France insisted that 50 weeks of the year they have to use Strasbourg. All the hotel prices go up and everything like that. So that just takes me on to how, again, they control our lives. Let's bring the money back here, let's give it back to the people responsible, and let's get it to the people who need it directly.
Alun, have we made change?
Let's get this right, because I think it's important to look at this as fact rather than fiction. You know, there are 7 Strasbourg sessions every year, I think it's circa 7. It works out just out over a week, just over every month or so. So you don't, to say it's 50 weeks in Strasbourg is simply not true. But I would tend to agree with you, actually. I think the Strasbourg figures are nonsense.
I apologise.
That's fine. But I think the Strasbourg thing should be abandoned as well as it happens. I think that's a complete waste of time when you look. Strasbourg is, of course, a beautiful city. But, you know, I would certainly think we should centralise the Parliament in Brussels. But let's look at agriculture. Agriculture, the Welsh Minister, it used to be me, did have the freedom to take a lot of those decisions. And in Wales, the payments are limited to €300 a year. I took my decision within the law that I decided in the European Union. So you can do that at the moment. If you cross the border in England, there is no upper limit. That's because, you know, you've got a Conservative government who's quite happy for money to go to their friends. So, you know, there is a difference between Wales and England in terms of the way we deliver agricultural payments. I agree. I think more payments should go to poorer farmers, smaller farmers, to maintain the social base of agriculture. The richer, what you call in Scotland, slipper farmers, who simply are landlords accruing more and more money. And we, and I think to be fair to him, it was Owen Paterson as well. I don't say very much fair about Owen Paterson, but he was a very good negotiator in Brussels, actually. You wouldn't believe it now, I think he says on television. But when he was negotiating as part of our team, a single UK team in Brussels, he negotiated quite a few restrictions on those sorts of farmers. And we do have the ability to make those decisions here in Wales. How much a farmer gets is largely a decision of the Welsh Government, not a decision of Brussels, because we can create different regions in Wales and pay at different levels. We're able to do that. The total amount paid is determined by the European budget. But within that, we can take those decisions. And I took a decision as a minister to pay more to the hills than to the lowlands. I took that decision as a minister. I actually lost that then in the UK High Court by British judges overtaking the decision of a Welsh minister. Nothing to do with Europe. That was a British democracy working. But we can take that decision as a matter.
Okay.
All the time you were talking about how effective you were politically in saving Welsh jobs, I couldn't help thinking about how effective you'd been about Welsh coal mines, about the Welsh steel, and about the Welsh fishing industry. Could you enlighten me, please?
Me. Look, I stood on the picket lines on the miners' strike, you know.
No, but you told us, in fact, how effective you had been instrumental in altering the policy and defending us.
That's because I was a minister sitting around the table.
Yeah.
What I'm telling you about is the opportunities that Welsh ministers and UK ministers have to shape European policy today. That is my experience.
It hasn't seemed very effective in the past, though.
Well, to be fair, I was a minister for 3 years. I was responsible for the coal mine. You know, those were, look, our mines in South Wales, I grew up, right?
But you're arguing for Europe, and it doesn't seem to be very effective.
I grew up in Tredegar, not so far away from here, but you know, an age away sometimes. I grew up in Tredegar. I saw 2 grandfathers die of the dust. I know my friends, who I was in school with, went down the mines to work. It was a community which was based on an industry, and that industry was attacked and closed and destroyed by an aggressive Conservative government that wanted to break our union, our communities, and our industry. That was not a matter for Europe. That was a political decision taken by an elected British Prime Minister who went to war with the people of Britain. And that was a disaster for the whole of Britain.
There are Welsh coal mines, though, that have...
So in terms of what happened to the coal mines, let's not pretend that that was anything to do with Europe. That was a government waging war against its own people. And when you talk about the steel industry, you know, and Welsh fisheries, I believe, have a very strong future, a very good future, partly because we protected inshore fisheries. The Welsh fishing fleet is largely an inshore fleet. It's not a deep water fleet. So what we need to do in Wales is to actually have more onshore facilities to enable them to add value to their products. That's what we need in Wales. We need European funding to help us do that. The steel industry is one of the great foundational industries of this country. I want to see the United Kingdom government standing up and arguing for the future of that industry. We need to do this at a European level. Can't do it at a UK level. You know, that's not where that game is played. If we were in a situation of leaving the European Union and tariffs being placed upon our steel here in Wales or in the United Kingdom, then that steel industry would disappear overnight. And I tell you one thing, when I talk to my brother about the work that he's doing day in, day out, he's had to move from Tredegar to Birmingham to work in Capara, right? And when I talk to steel workers who live in my constituency, who work in Port Talbot, who work in Llanwern, let me tell you now, I'm yet to meet anybody who says they want the steel, they believe the steel industry can survive outside the European Union. I'm yet to meet nobody.
Why was the European Union so tardy in reacting with tariffs to protect the dumping of Chinese steel?
Do you know what the European Union is? Fundamentally, right? Fundamentally, do you know what it is?
It's an unelected autocracy.
Oh, well, that's your view.
It is my view. It is my
Do you
view.
know fundamentally what it is? Do you know fundamentally what it is? It's all of us. It's all of us.
That's very easy to say.
It's all of us. It's our elected governments taking decisions. I do not like a lot of the decisions taken by this Tory government in London. That doesn't mean I want to leave the United Kingdom. It means I want to fight harder for a Labour government. When I was sitting around the table, and when I sat around the table in Council of Ministers, I didn't feel that I was being dictated to. I felt that I was shaping the decisions which affect the future of our continent.
Interesting about the coal mines, because I wish I hadn't brought up coal mines, because my great-grandfather led 1.1 million miners in this country. And it's something that I've studied for quite a long while, and in fact, I'm very friendly with the Durham miners, and in 2014 I had the great privilege of going to the face of one of the last 3 deep coal mines in this country, which will probably be about closed now. And the one thing that I just cannot understand we do as a country is we import coal presently from America, from Colombia, and from Russia. And if you have a look at the energy tonight to keep these lights on, you will find that about 26% of the energy is coming from coal. Yet we're not using the coal that we have. We're not looking at underground gasification out at sea, which is possible. We're not looking at carbon capture and storage, because this government has basically closed it. Yet, in this world, we are opening something like 1,000 coal-fired power stations present. So it doesn't matter if it's India, China, wherever the case may be. They're opening up coal-fired power stations. In fact, they're going to have to open up coal-fired power stations in Holland, because so many people are starting to use electric cars and they can't get electricity quick enough. What do we do as a government? We close ours, because we are always correct. We are told by the EU that this is the way forward, and we do it correctly. Germany opens up coal-fired power stations, so does Holland, and we close ours. So if we have an energy crisis, we've had it, because we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of coal. Now the steel works here. We don't have a seat as a country in the World Trade Organization, because we gave it up to Europe. So Europe sits in the World Trade Organization. We have anti-dumping rules in the World Trade Organization. That should have been used to stop Chinese steel coming into this country. When you go in HS2, when eventually it's built, you'll be on the rails of Chinese steel. My attitude is the French will sell all the cars, the Renaults, the Peugeots, the Italians will sell the Fiat. We just drive anything. Let's support our own industry.
Well, look, I've got no issue with that. I think we should be supporting British steel. I find it extraordinary, but you've got a British nationalist government, largely in Westminster, building Royal Naval vessels out of steel from anywhere in the world except Britain. I think that's an astonishing decision. You can't blame the EU for that. You blame the incompetent government in Westminster for that, and you vote them out at the next occasion. That's the democracy we have in the United Kingdom.
You could have reacted more quickly, though, with tariffs from the EC. I mean,
no, absolutely, absolutely.
so why didn't we then?
Because we've got Tories.
Because of vested interests.
Because we've got a Tory government in Westminster who has sought to block that time and time again. If you speak to the trade unions who've been out in Brussels campaigning on this, they will be very, very clear to you that the people who were blocking anti-dumping legislation were the British government.
There are others keen to have their say.
With regards to this question of steel again, you keep saying that the European Union, but then you keep blaming the British government. But then you say the European Union. Now the answer, can you explain fully what you mean by that?
It's what I was trying to say earlier, what is the European Union? Because you could see it as just an amorphous group across there of faceless people who exist in some ether, in an unspecific way. Or you can actually look at what it is. The European Union is us. It's a collection of governments taking decisions collectively together. It's not, the Commission implements decisions. It's not true to say that if the Commission makes law, it hasn't got the legal power to do that. It's not law. It's not legally empowered to do that. So, law is made by council ministers and by Parliament co-legislators.
If the EU was interested.
Just a point on the steel works, I think we've worked very closely with Sister Union over this. And they went out to Brussels, and when they went out to Brussels, what we were told was the European Union wanted to lower the tariffs of energy to help our tackle steel in Europe. And guess who blocked it? It wasn't the European Union, it was the Tory government that blocked it.
Okay, let's
Half
take
that. It was not the European Referendum Division with the steelworks.
a collection of governments working together for the good of the people.
Well, that's a fantastic way to put it. First of all, the European Parliament cannot actually propose a law. The Council of Ministers cannot propose a law. The proposal has got to come from the European Commission. Then it goes down to the Council of Ministers, and then it goes down to the European Parliament. Just now in the European Parliament, we've got an 8% say. And now you've got majority voting, which means if you want to push anything through, you have to have 65% of a vote. To be able to block anything, again, you're looking at something like 40%, I haven't given exact figures, but it's a huge amount. So the people, we have 73 MEPs in the Parliament, out of where there's 760, 70, I haven't given the figure exactly. But we've only got 8% there. They're not there half the time. They're not doing their job. They cost us nearly £1.5 million each. And nobody can even be bothered to go and find out who they are and ask them to do something because they've got no power. So, the power comes from the Commission. One of the things that we've got to discuss tonight, and I'm really interested to hear Alun's view of it, is TTIP. And again, if you go out into the street and you speak to 1,000 people, maybe one person might know about TTIP. And TTIP is one of the most dangerous things that could happen to this country. And it may be a situation that we either stay in or we come out, and it will still affect us. And that is the secret negotiation between America and the European Commission. So secret that the European Parliament, or anyone wants to actually find out about it, they have to get into a room, they have to read, not allowed a pen, not allowed a paper, not allowed a mobile phone, and they can only read parts of it. And that was supposed to be agreed by the end of 2015. If that comes off, pharmaceutical costs will go up. They will actually be able to sue governments if the government of any other country in Europe actually affects the profits of that corporation. This is an incredibly dangerous situation, and it's one which I would love to be able to hear from tonight.
In terms of the legislation, it's certainly right, UKIP, and if you don't turn up largely, they turn up to fill in their expense forms and then they go away again. And UKIP are an absolute disgrace to our democracy in terms of taking the money but not doing the work. That is a disgrace to our democracy, and that's what undermines democracy. People who stand for election, tell people we're going to work on your behalf, take the money and don't do the job. And every UKIP member who's fails to turn up to vote, they've got the worst voting record in Europe, should be ashamed of themselves. And I think shouldn't be...
That wasn't the question.
But
You're not answering the question.
Don't turn up, right? In terms of the legislation, because it's important that people understand and appreciate this, legislation in the European Union is passed by the Council of Ministers and by the European Parliament. MEPs are important in this process. When we were debating and discussing CAP in Council of Ministers, we had a delegation from the European Parliament there in order to take that agreement back to Brussels so they could vote on it as well. And it didn't become law until they had voted on it. They were very important. And if you talk to any commissioner, you will know the time they've been able to talk to MEPs. The only person who believes that MEPs are not important is Nigel Farage, and he's wrong on almost everything. TTIP, right? TTIP is a trade negotiation, is a trade deal between the European Union and the United States. It's been in discussion, negotiation now for 5 years, 6 years. It's been well, yeah, with preliminary negotiations lasted a long time before that. And it is a hugely significant trade agreement. I'm actually more pro-UK than almost anybody I know, particularly everybody in the Labour Party, in fact. I think that the United States is a very important trading partner of ours, and everybody wants to leave the European Union, of course, wants to do a trade deal with them, and say they're going to do a trade deal with them, and then they start talking about TTIP and say how difficult it is and how impossible it is. You know, you can either have one or the other. I've negotiated trade with the United States government, and it's difficult, it's hard, they're very tough negotiators. I believe that we need to have a trade agreement with the United States, but it has to be the right trade agreement. The United States is already the biggest overseas investor in Wales, supporting and sustaining thousands of jobs in our economy. We need to have a relationship with the United States based on trade. What we have to do, is have the right agreement, one which doesn't sell the National Health Service and one which doesn't lead to a privatisation of our public service.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Can I make one observation? Henry Ford said history is bunk. Now, if we look through history from the Roman times, all great conurbations of where they've been forced, very, very diverse tribes or nations have been forced together, they've eventually exploded. And the last one was Russia, and it was very messy. And I can see that the EU is getting to the stage where it's just about to go into the implosion. I think sometimes, do we get out? I think get out before it implodes, because I think it's in a hell of a mess at the moment, and it's going downhill fast.
Is the EU going to implode?
Well, all you've got to do is you've got to look at how Greece, Spain, Italy, the Czech Republic, and how these people have prospered under the European Union. Prospered. You imagine living in Greece just now, and the future you've got with the austerity.
Yeah.
Now, if you hadn't been told that you've got to go into the euro, and that's going to be the best thing for sliced bread, then what you could have had is you could have still had the drachma, and you could have done what we did in 2008, and you could have devalued, and you could have saved the country, same as Iceland did, etc. So the whole thing is that they haven't got a home. And I look at Spain, and I look at Italy, and I feel sorry for them, because the euro is actually pegged to the Deutschmark. And they've got between a 20 and 30% advantage over any other country because of that. And what they're doing is then, the only reason they saved Greece is because of all the exports that they're sending there. But the other thing is that we as a country could actually be footing the bill for that one day. And if the European Union collapses, we have a guarantee that we will actually foot that bill, and it's joint and it's several. And that is a very dangerous situation to be in. Just now, we're probably in there for 6 billion, and it could be 60 billion. And that's what we're looking at in the future. So what I'm looking at with the European Union is actually a situation that's very simple. Now I want handshakes with Europe. I don't want handcuffs with Europe. And I want a Europe where we're all friendly together and we decide to trade together. But I don't want 28 people who are sworn not to represent their countries, but to actually represent the European Union. And when I cannot decide that I want to get rid of them, that's an impossibility. And that's what I'd like to be able to hear from Alan.
Ali,
Except you said at the beginning you wanted to be like Norway, and you've just described the nightmare that is the Norwegian relationship with the European Union, where you don't have a handshake and you have got the handcuffs. And their handcuffs are being placed upon you by people you cannot elect and are not in any way accountable to you. That is the Norwegian example which you just described. Let me tell you, when I sat in Council of Ministers, I wasn't there as an EU minister, I was there as a Welsh minister fighting for Wales. Owen Patterson sat next to me, fighting for England. Simon Cobley sat opposite me, fighting for Ireland. And every minister around that table is arguing and campaigning for their own country. There's nobody sat there saying, I represent the European Union and not my country. It's a fantasy to believe that any politician does that or acts in that way. That's simply not how politicians act or think, in any way. That's not a reality. But the reality is that if I don't believe the European Union is going to implode, by the way. I don't believe that countries, I believe that countries evolve together and work together. Wales was conquered by England, but I don't feel like a conquered nation, let me tell you that. And when I'm bringing up my children to speak our language within 5 or 10 miles sometimes of the English border, I don't feel like a conquered nation, and nobody can tell me that. Let me tell you this. We, as individual nations and peoples and cultures of our great European civilization, can live and work and govern together. And if we can't do that, solve our differences over the negotiation table, then what is the alternative? Remember Winston Churchill, democracy is the worst form of government, except every other one.
How much quantitative easing was announced by the European Central Bank? How much?
I didn't hear your question.
How much quantitative easing was announced just recently on a desperate need to maintain the stability of the euro?
Oh, look, if you want to discuss, the 20...
No, I'm just suggesting that it is unequivocal how much we are committed to, and the quantitative easing that was announced just recently, yesterday or the day before, was unbelievable. It was open-ended.
Look, in terms of where we are, in terms of our financial market, I got enough criticism from the all here to last the leader. Let me tell you, I wasn't I'm a member of the Labour Party. I don't know if I should say this, but I wasn't the greatest fan of Gordon Brown as Prime Minister. But one of the things he did, in the G20 in London was to largely save the Western economies. And what he did there in terms of bringing together some of the biggest economies in the world in order to restore our economy, I thought it was a massive stroke of international finances, and it was something that saved thousands and thousands of jobs, homes and livelihoods, millions across the West. But let's face it.
You can do that once.
The issue created by that storm in 2008 were not simply the creation here either in the United Kingdom or of the European Union. It was largely the creation of the financial market in the US and bad international regulation. And I would be first to argue for far greater international regulation of the financial market.
No, let's just have this out, please, because we'd like to finish this. I'd like to have a resolution. Quantitative easing can be done once or twice, perhaps to cushion the market to a situation which was unstable.
I agree with what the person in the audience was actually saying, that it is a frightening scenario about the quantitative easing that's coming from the European Central Bank. But I'm really delighted that Alan's mentioned Churchill, because I would be making a quote from Churchill, and I thought, I better not, he obviously doesn't like Churchill, and he does. And Churchill has actually said that we are with Europe, but not of it. And we are interested and associated, but not absorbed. And this is exactly what we're trying to say tonight. It's like in 1908, when my great-grandfather went to Paris and he met a chap called Jean Jaurès, and he went on to be friends with him. They talked about socialism. He was the head of the socialists in France, and he was fighting for peace before the First World War. And he was assassinated on the 31st of July, 1914, because he wanted to hold a strike, national strike in France. It was organised, one in Germany, with the people, and it was organised by my great-grandfather in this country. And a few days after that, the war then commenced. And that was 9 million people killed. So my attitude is that the people of Europe are all just like us. They're all people. They're all people. They want to live in peace. They want to trade. They want good futures for the family. But when you have a commission which has to swear an oath, not to protect their country and to represent their country, but to swear an oath to the European Union belief, then to me that is wrong, because they are the leaders of Europe and they're not democratically elected, and there is no way you can get rid of them. And that brings you back to the famous 2021. If you can't get rid of them, they're the problem.
Not democratically elected and then representing Europe and nobody else.
But commissioners aren't there. Aren't the leaders of Europe? We are. As a minister, I was taking those decisions. The commissioners, you can shake your head as much as you like. I was in the meeting, you were. Let me tell you this.
I've got common sense there.
Well, you might have common sense. You commissioners as well.
You've read the treaties as well.
I want the commissioners to work fair for everyone. I don't want, I worked with a Romanian agriculture commissioner. I didn't want him doing deals for Romania. I wanted him to work fairly with everybody. And I would expect him to work fairly with everybody. When you become a commissioner, you are appointed not as a national representative, but to work on behalf of everyone. You are a civil servant. That's what I expect of a civil servant. When I took office, I would, if the Conservatives take office in Wales in a couple of months' time, God forbid, I would expect the civil servants to deliver a Conservative manifesto. That's what they're there for. The democracy is in the Council of Ministers, not in the Commission. The Commission does what they're told by us, the elected politicians of Europe. That is our democracy. And yet, you cannot get rid of them. And let me tell you, in the Council of Ministers, they have this federation, on almost every council. The first item of business is the presidency welcoming a new minister. After the last one, being shut up by their different democracies, by their elections. So there is, and my old friend, Simon Corbyn at the moment, he's just lost his election now. Now he's probably out of office. That's the democracy. He won't be back in
He's not a commissioner.
next month. He's lost. He's
not a commissioner.
Right? That is how the democracy works. The commissioners are not elected. They are civil servants. In the same way as our permanent secretaries here are not elected. They are civil servants.
Okay, let's hear from somebody else.
Democratic deficit was meaningful reform of the
Because of the democratic deficit in the European Commission warrant meaningful reform, not abandonment. Because, for example, I'd love it if the flight to Westminster would mean abandonment of Westminster.
I would love to actually stay in Europe, not EU as it is just now. And if we could really get fundamental reform in Europe, where we could have proper democracy, proper fairness, proper accountability, proper assistance to countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, Lithuania, just these countries who need trade, who need assistance. And if we knew that we were giving assistance to governments who were not corrupt, who were not led by people who had the interests of themselves before the interests of the people, then I would think that I would definitely be here tonight saying, let's stay in the European Union, totally reformed. But why is it, as people of all these nations, that we cannot lead to that sensible, honest reform? What makes us so scared to actually bring up that question? Why do we need to accept that we are ruled from Brussels and they make the decisions and we as a country have an 8% say? So therefore, yes, if we could actually bring proper, democratic, honest politics into Europe, restructure it, and I'm sure Alun and I could sit down tonight for an hour and come up with an A4 page about how to restructure Europe to make it into a better representation for the people. If we can do that, why can they not do it? Because they get too much to lose. Certain people who do it will get too much to lose. And I think that's a great thing.
But it's you they, that's the trouble. They are we. You know, it's not they across there. You know, I am an elected politician. I'm facing the people of Blair in 6 weeks' time. It's up to them whether I sit in the next assembly or not. And they take that decision. If I'm elected, if there's a Labour government elected in May, and I'm appointed to that government, I will go back to Brussels and argue Wales's case. That is our democracy. And, you know, I would like to see significant, you're absolutely right, you know, I want to see significant reforms in the United Kingdom. I'd like to see proportional representation, for example, for Westminster. I'd like to see the Commission drawn from the European Parliament and not appointed by governments at the moment. Commissioners are appointed by individual governments by agreement. And I would like to see that system change. I would like to see a lot of things change in terms of how we operate our democracy. I would like to see politicians recalled if they don't turn up and vote, like some of the people who don't turn up and vote. I think they should be sacked, frankly, if they don't do the job they're elected to do. I would like to see a lot of recall here in the United Kingdom, in Wales. I'd like to see a lot more direct democracy, more referenda, if you like, for decisions taken. But we're not ruled by Brussels. When I was there, I was taking the decisions. And when I was sitting in Cardiff Bay today, this week, when we were passing law, you know, I disagreed with government at the end of the day on banning e-cigarettes. But we were told to do that by Brussels. That was a decision we took ourselves in Cardiff Bay when we legislated to reform the social services system. We did it in Cardiff Bay. When we reformed education, we did it in Cardiff Bay. When we implemented common agricultural policy, we take those decisions how we implement it in Cardiff Bay. That's our democracy. The idea that there's some faceless bureaucrat sitting in the Berlin Wall somewhere dictating all these things to us is a fantasy. It's a nightmarish fantasy of some sort of Victoriana. What I would like to see is real debate and discussion about political reform in local authorities, in Welsh Assembly, in the National Assembly, in Westminster and in Europe. And we need to have that debate. But what I don't do is walk away when I lose one argument.
Just to pick up on something that you said there, if the they are we not doubling the debate? Is that doubling up not a very costly exercise?
Well, I don't see the European Union as this amorphous dark shadow in Brussels, because the European Union, when it exists in Council of Ministers that are the representatives of elected governments. You know, if you want to join the European Union, you have to go through an exhaustive negotiation process. And one of a part of that, a fundamental central part of that, is the effectiveness of your democracy. If you have not got a functioning democracy and democratic system, you cannot join the European Union. And that is absolutely fundamental to who we are as a European civilization.
Can I mention, come back on that one point?
Yeah, well,
So you say that Turkey then is a very democratic country and looks after its own people there.
No, I'm not.
So you, at the moment, as you know, we basically join that for 3 years.
No, we won't.
You say they won't.
I don't think Turkey's going to join the EU in any foreseeable circumstances. They started negotiations in 1959. So far, they've agreed one chapter. It's not, I don't see it happening. And this is one of the real difficulties I have sometimes with the debate on this. Because, you know, we also had UK PPP a couple of weeks ago, which was nasty, chauvinistic nonsense. You know, pointing fingers politics. And we all know where that leads. And I think we've got to walk away from those sorts of politics. And I I don't think Turkey has a functioning democracy, quite frankly. And I've got significant problems with human rights in Turkey and what happens there. And so I wouldn't support Turkish membership of the European Union at the moment. I would hope that those reforms will take place and that Turkey will develop a functioning democracy. It's a crucial place, you know, the geographical part of Asia and Europe, so it's important that Turkey does reform. But, you know, I would like to see the European Union taking a more proactive role, for example, in establishing democratic government in places like Bosnia.
Okay, let's hear from Blair.
The interesting thing is that Turkey just now is involved in the European Free Trade Association with Europe, and Europe is looking at fast-tracking them in to the European Union. And if that happens, we would open the doors to Europe to another 75 to 80 million people, which is quite frightening. One of the things that concerns me in some ways is that Alun is saying that Europe is us. If Europe is us, why do we have about 60% of the laws made in Brussels for this country? Because we didn't have a chance to make the laws. We've only got a very small percentage of people in the European Parliament. But the amount of regulations and laws made for this country are made in Europe. And the thing is that when the laws are made in Europe, they're not made for Neath or for Wales or for Britain. The laws are actually made for all the 28 countries. And these countries have got to then comply to all these laws and regulations. With all the different variations of people like countries like Romania, where the average wage is £5,000 or £6,000 a year, whereas the average wage here is maybe £21,000 a year. Yet they're making laws which everyone's got to actually take it as read, because otherwise we haven't got the final say in it. The final say is the European Court of Justice. And that overrules any of the people in this country. They'll be the final say to it. So you've then got to look at it and say, it's not all us, not us here tonight. It's the way that the decisions are made there and imposed on us, and we have no choice to actually appeal.
Okay, you know, can I just challenge that? Because the 60% figure, in order to get to the 60% figure, you've got to do an extraordinarily, you've got to be an extraordinary athletic mathematician. Because the House of Commons thinks it's 13.2%, by the way. And if you want to get to 60%, you have to include all the secondary legislation which goes through the European institutions in order to protect the single market and imports and exports into that market every day. So, for example, the 60% figure is arrived at by including laws that are part of European law, but don't apply in the United Kingdom, like some of the issues about the growth of tobacco. We don't grow tobacco in the United Kingdom. Growing olives, we largely grow olives in the United Kingdom. The management of the Baltic waters, we don't manage Baltic waters largely in the United Kingdom. So you've actually got to get a huge number of laws in that, in order to say 60% of our laws are determined by the European Union. And it's a bit of a mathematical confidence trick in some ways. 13.2% is a figure the House of Commons likely. And my claims, stuff on this. Do you know there's European law on this bottle? Do you know what it does? Yeah? It ensures that the plastic this bottle is made of doesn't cause cancer.
It does.
That's a good law. I want more laws like that. It's a law that protects us in terms of imports and safety and regulations. So that when I buy an item, I plug it in. I know it's safe. My mother wants that law. I want that law. Everybody I know wants that law. So what you've got to do is really do argue. Do we need
stand up and tell him?
Do we want to have
run.
imports and exports at the safe? I think we do. And then you need to argue, but we don't get a say in those. In Council of Ministers, 87% of decisions taken are taken with the UK voting for that decision.
Thank you, Alan. There's a big difference between 13.2% and 60%. Are you an athletic mathematician, Blair, Smillie?
What I'm looking at is I'm looking at laws and regulations which come out from the EU, which we've got to comply to. But the whole thing about this is, are we not good enough as a country to make sure that we can make a product which is not going to give you cancer? Do we really need to have a nanny state to actually tell us, you know, what is good and what is wrong, and they then control everything that's happening? So the thing is, good argument, but I'm sorry.
What about your facts and figures? There is a big difference.
My facts and figures, I stand by that 60% of the laws in this country are made in Europe.
Do you think that's correct as well?
Yes.
Germany was 87% when it was asked.
You know, I've never heard that. I don't recognise.
Okay, let's hear
Well,
from the young
the fact that you
people.
don't
Can I
recognise it
just
doesn't
say,
make it's wrong.
can I just make a point?
Let's hear from the young people.
I just want to say, can we go back to what you said about apparently us having the last say in Europe and stuff like that? Aren't all the countries in Europe meant to work together, like working together on climate change? Why are you challenging individual countries? Like, why can't we just work as one?
Is this a good forum for collaborative discussion?
Right, I think that's an excellent question. In some ways, I think the free world should also work as one. And things that are happening in Libya and Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, that we should be taking the free world and making sure that these situations don't actually happen. The biggest problem with the world is one word, it's called greed. And greed usually comes from trade, because the people who are the big transnational corporations, the people who run them to make profit. And that's what they're responsible for. If you're a director of a corporation, your first responsibility is to make profit for your shareholders. Now, when you have Europe, which is integrated with transnational corporations, massive corporations, first thing they want to do, make as much money as possible. Then they want to pay as little tax as possible. They are not interested in the people. All they're interested is in that. And they are the people who hold the power, not the population. So what we've really got to do in a socialistic maybe way is to try and bring the people power back and take some of that power away from the transnational corporations who are so heavily involved in America and in Europe and creating all these trade deals. Let's try and take some of the money which is being hidden and put it back into the communities, to the people, and get the people to spend that money. And that will then make sure that everyone is in a better situation. And I think you're absolutely right. It's an excellent point. Thank you.
Okay, Alun, is it taking money away from communities?
Definitely, there you go through the voting end tonight. We had commissioners first of all, now we've got major corporations that are taking our money off. You know, I don't know who we've got next. Let me say this. Well, you know, question earlier about reform. I think there are significant areas where we need greater European competence, frankly. One is on taxation. I think it's an absolute disgrace that Google are able to put the profits through Ireland or through Luxembourg in order to avoid paying tax in the United Kingdom. I think that's an absolute disgrace. I would like to see the European Union having the powers to take action to stop that happening. I'd like to see the European Union being empowered to do far more on terms of attacking climate change and other issues. I'd like to see the European Union doing more to secure our wider European home in the Balkans and in the Near East. I've worked on European Union projects in the Middle East in the past, trying to establish functioning democracies on our borders. Absolutely essential work. You know, I would like to see the European Union do far more than that. And when it comes to trade deals, this is where we need a powerful union of three democracies working together to ensure that those corporations, whether it's Facebook or Google or who else, are not able to avoid paying their taxation, their social responsibilities, and that means having powers that we can use and having the structures and institutions that can both establish those powers, hold those powers to account, and then deliver on those powers, and a court system that can force Google and Facebook in order to make sure they do pay their dues to society. And that means having European structures that are functioning and are effective and frankly are strong.
Okay. Any more questions?
Just one, please. Just to follow up to this gentleman's question, he started talking about Greece and the potential for chaos, effectively. And my wife is, her mother's Greek, and when we now go to Athens, she cries. Parts of Athens look like a war zone, and all of the young men, there's over 50% unemployment in testosterone-filled young men, and they are that close to exploding. And the party that's appealing to them is a Nazi party, effectively. And yet they're feeling it quite attractive because they're offering them solutions. Whether the solutions work, I certainly don't believe. But to young men who have no hope of work, that's what they are being offered. And all the feedback we're getting from the family there is that Greece is that close to being a really chaotic country.
We of 1930.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. I'm going to offer the two parties the opportunity to sum up their argument now. It is getting closer to 9 o'clock. So 2 minutes each, beginning with Blair.
Again, another thing that I can't understand is that this Labour Party actually wants to stay in Europe. It wants to stay in Europe where it's really full of corrupt individuals. It's full of multinational companies who are making the decisions to lobby the commissioners. And here we have is the Labour Party, the party started by my great-grandfather, which wanted to have the power back in the people. And we've handed it over to Europe. And the one thing that David Cameron, in his fear, messages out to the public is you can take a leap in the dark. Well, I'm not a politician. I'm a small business owner. And I take, in some ways, a leap in the dark in the first of every month. Because I've got 14 people to pay. I've got rents, rates, heat, light, insurance, vans, the whole lot to pay. And I don't know if anyone in the second will come and buy anything. So I've got to have faith. I've got to make sure I've got the best people. I've got to make sure I've got the best products. And I've got to go out there by the end of that month and make enough money to survive. Nobody pays me at the end of the month from my government or from a corporation or anything like that. Now that is a leap in the dark. And what I want to do is I want to take Britain back to a situation that we have a parliament who is working for the money that we pay, who is totally democratic, who is actually accountable to us. And I want to then say, let's work with our friends in Europe on a free trade association agreement. Let's work with them, but then let's have a look at the outside world, the Commonwealth, where there's a third of the population, and the other areas, and let's make this country great once more. Thank you.
I'm a great fan of the All Blacks, particularly here in Neath, of course. But I'm not sure we make Britain great by trading with New Zealand alone. You know, we have one of the, we sit as a part of, we're able to shape the biggest trading bloc in the world. We sit at the top table. I want to see Britain, I want to see Wales leading that trade bloc. I want to see Britain and Wales shaping the future of the European Union. I'm not scared of going to Brussels and arguing a case. I'm not going to run away, shrivel up into some neo-colonialist or imperialistic nightmare. I'm not going to run away from Europe. I want to embrace Europe, and I want Europe to be a part of my children's future. I want us to be able to trade freely with the biggest trading bloc in the world. Before I was elected, I ran my own business, and I share your feelings about the first of the month. I used to think on the 14th as well, so I didn't have money to pay those bills. But in order to trade, I wanted a stable operating environment where everybody played by the same rules, and where I was able to trade freely with people who were my customers and my clients across the European, wherever they were in Europe. I didn't want to pay tariffs to get past Dover. I didn't want to be in a situation whereby my goods were more expensive than theirs. I didn't want to be in a situation whereby I had to deliver regulations that my MP or my AM wasn't able to vote for. I didn't want my taxes to go into a budget that I couldn't shape. I don't want to have to ask, take a begging bowl to Brussels, can we do this, can we do that? I want to lead Europe. I believe in this country. I believe in our people. I believe in our future as well as our past. And what I want to see is Britain and Wales shaping and leading Europe, not running scared from it.
Thank you. Well, wherever we stand, it is certainly a very important issue. And the good thing about this evening is that we've had an opportunity to listen to a robust debate, to ask questions, and to hear answers from both sides of the debate. So it's been an opportunity for us to make sure that when we do go and cast our vote on the 23rd of June, we go and are able to make an informed decision. And I would encourage you, wherever you are this evening, to consider what you've heard, to go away and to talk to others about it too, because it's important that as many people as possible become a part of this conversation, are energized by it, and we hope that as a result of it, new people will become energized and want to be part of politics in this country. It's been a great evening. We've had some robust debate. I want to thank Blair, Smillie and Alun Davies, who I'd like them to join me. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am ddod a siwrne saff adre i chi. Thank you all for coming and a very safe journey home.